She used a fake pregnancy as glue for our broken marriage. By the time she told me she was pregnant, I was already halfway out the door. Not literally, not yet, but mentally, emotionally, I was gone. The connection was dead. Every argument felt recycled. Every silent dinner stretched like a mile of bad road. I'd stopped picturing a future with her months ago, and honestly, I was just biding my time. I had a plan, simple, clean. I'd saved up enough to rent a place. I'd picked out a weekend when she was going out of town with her sister, and I'd even written a letter, one of those quiet exits where you leave your key on the counter and disappear without fanfare. I wasn't leaving out of spite. I was just done. The marriage had become a cold war, and I didn't have the energy to keep pretending it could be saved. And then, just like that, everything flipped. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I'd come home early from work because a shipment was delayed, and I walked in to find her standing in the kitchen, holding something in both hands like it was about to explode. Her face was pale, lips trembling, eyes wide. It took me a second to register what she was holding, but once I saw the two pink lines on that little white stick, I felt like I got kicked in the chest. She didn't say a word, just looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I couldn't. My brain was running in 100 directions at once. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't part of anything. At first, I genuinely didn't believe it. Not because I thought she was lying. I hadn't even gone there yet. I just couldn't process it. The timing, the shock, the absolute derailment of everything I'd been preparing for. All I'd wanted was a clean break, and now there was something else. Someone else. Even if it wasn't planned. Even if we were broken. Even if I didn't love her anymore. The second she said the words, "I think I'm about 6 weeks," I knew I couldn't walk away. Not like that. Not knowing there was a child involved. She didn't cry, but she looked like she wanted to. Her hands were shaking. She said she was scared. Said she hadn't told anyone yet. Said she wanted to keep it. That hit me hard. This wasn't a scare. This was real. She wasn't asking for permission. She was telling me I was going to be a father. And even if I wasn't ready to hear that, I knew exactly what kind of man I refused to be. I wasn't going to be the guy who dipped out and left someone else to handle the fallout. I told her I'd stay. I told her I'd help. I told her we'd figure it out together. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling like the walls were pressing in. Everything I'd rehearsed, everything I'd emotionally prepared myself for, it was gone. In its place was a future I hadn't asked for, tied to a woman I didn't trust, but now bound by something bigger than either of us. I wasn't staying for her. That was over. I was staying for the baby. Over the next week, she started acting different. Not dramatically, but softer, more affectionate. Like she was relieved that I didn't leave. We still weren't back to normal, but now there were new conversations about names, nurseries, budgeting, how to rearrange the guest bedroom. I kept my answers short, focused, practical. I wasn't trying to fall back in love. I was trying to build a foundation for someone who hadn't even arrived yet. I took on more hours at work. I opened a new savings account. I started reading up on what to expect in the first trimester. She said her first appointment was already scheduled. Said her doctor was amazing. Said she'd go alone since it was just blood work for now. I said okay. I didn't want to push. Not yet. Some nights, I'd look over at her while she slept and try to imagine what it would be like. Me, her, and a baby in this house. Not the one we used to dream about when we were young and in love, but the one we had now, the quiet, strained version where we both knew something had died, but were pretending to hold the funeral later. I told myself I'd learn to navigate it. For the baby, I'd stay because I had to, and I'd make the most of it. I owed them that. And just like that, the idea of walking away was off the table. The damage between us was still there, still heavy, still lingering in every silence and every forced smile. But now we had something new in the middle, something that didn't ask to be here, and I wasn't about to turn my back on that. Whatever came next, whatever we had to fix, whatever I had to sacrifice, I'd do it. For the baby. From the outside, we looked like any couple expecting their first child. She downloaded the baby apps, started talking about names, avoided sushi and caffeine, and made it clear to friends that she was tired all the time. She touched her belly when people were around, rubbed it in little circles like she was already connected to the life growing inside her. She made low noises when she sat down, and once or twice she even walked with her hand on her back, like the pressure was already there. She played the part well, almost too well. But it didn't register as strange back then. Why would it? People change when they're expecting. She just leaned into it earlier than I expected. Still, I noticed things. Small things. Like how she always wore the same kind of clothes, loose, high-waisted, nothing that clung too tight. At first, I chalked it up to comfort. But as weeks turned into months, I realized I'd never actually seen her body change. No bump. No swelling. No nothing. But I didn't let myself question it. We were still in the first trimester, and from everything I'd read, it wasn't unusual for a woman not to show right away, especially during a first pregnancy. I told myself it was early. I told myself I just wasn't looking close enough. I told myself it would all make sense soon. She went to the doctor a lot. More often than I expected. When I asked, she said her doctor was extra cautious. Said it was due to her age, her hormone levels, some kind of borderline issue that needed monitoring. It sounded technical. Plausible. I didn't have the energy to argue. I was barely keeping up as it was. I'd picked up every shift I could get at work. Weekends, late nights, split days off. I wasn't just staying for her. I was staying for the baby. And that meant making sure we were okay. Financially, emotionally, physically. I was trying to do the right thing. So if she needed to go to the doctor 3 times a week, fine. If she didn't want to eat certain foods, fine. If she said she needed more rest, fine. I'd carry the rest of the weight. I couldn't make it to every appointment. There were too many, and the warehouse needed people who showed up. I went when I could. The first time, I remember sitting in the small waiting room, staring at posters about vitamins and ultrasounds, wondering what kind of dad I'd be. They called us in, and there he was, our doctor, Kevin Wolf. Friendly, confident, white coat, the whole thing. He greeted me like we were old friends, gave her a little nod, and started talking us through the basics. He showed me something on the screen, some kind of blurred movement, some shadow of a shape. I didn't understand any of it. I wasn't about to say that out loud. So I just nodded, smiled, and let it go. I assumed he knew what he was doing. We went again 2 weeks later, and he showed us something else. More images, more vague explanations. I didn't question him. Why would I? He had the equipment, the charts, the confidence. It was all too fast for me to process. He talked with her more than me, but I figured that was normal. I was just the guy in the chair. I remember leaving that appointment thinking maybe I should read more about what ultrasounds actually looked like, just so I could feel more prepared next time. But I didn't. I went back to work. I picked up another double shift. As the weeks passed, the appointments continued. I started skipping them more often, not because I didn't care, but because I needed to earn. Diapers, car seat, medical bills, maternity clothes, it all added up, and I didn't want to fall behind. I told myself I'd be more present once the baby came. Once the chaos slowed. She always came home from those appointments tired. Said she cried during one of them, overwhelmed by emotion. Said she heard the heartbeat. I asked her what it sounded like, and she paused, then said it was fast, like a horse galloping. That sounded right to me. I told her I was proud of her, that I'd try to come to the next one. She smiled, kissed my cheek, said, "You're already a great dad." I remember that moment so clearly, the way she looked at me like I'd already proven myself, like the baby already mattered more than either of us. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Because if this baby was coming into the world with 2 broken people trying to hold it together, at least I could be the one holding the line. At least I could be the one carrying the weight while she carried the child. But there was still something off. She never let me touch her stomach. Always flinched. Always had a reason. It's sore. I'm bloated. I'm cramping. I just don't feel sexy right now. I didn't push. I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. I told myself every woman handled pregnancy differently. That maybe her body was just reacting in ways I didn't understand. And it's not like I had a frame of reference. This was all new to me. And according to her, everything was progressing fine. The doctor wasn't worried. So I wasn't either. Not yet. Still, I couldn't help but notice the disconnect. We didn't talk much. Our lives started rotating around this one concept, the baby. It was all we ever discussed. Every other subject was too tense, too fragile. If I brought up money, she'd get defensive. If I brought up intimacy, she'd say I wasn't being supportive. If I asked questions about the next appointment, she'd assure me everything was under control. And I wanted to believe her. I really did. So I stayed quiet. I worked. I kept showing up. I watched her belly stay flat and told myself it was normal. I let the doctor speak in riddles and nodded like I understood. I let her act like everything was fine because I was too tired to do anything else. I was trying to be a good man, a good partner, a future father. But something deep down was starting to itch. Just a little. Not enough to cause suspicion. Not enough to make accusations. But enough to make me start watching closer. Because even the best lies start to slip eventually. It started slowly, the change in her wardrobe. By the time we reached the second trimester, every single thing she wore looked like it came straight out of a clearance bin labeled, "Hide everything." Sweatshirts 2 sizes too big, flowy t-shirts that reached her knees, long cardigans even on warm afternoons, and thick leggings paired with house slippers like she was dressing to disappear. She said she was cold more often than usual, said her body felt different, like she didn't belong in it anymore. I didn't question her, not at first. I figured pregnancy made people sensitive to things, mood shifted, hormones rewired everything, and if wearing a shapeless hoodie helped her feel okay, then I wasn't about to make it an issue. I only noticed the pattern when I realized I hadn't seen her bare stomach in over a month, not even in passing. It was always tucked beneath layers of cotton, always hidden behind blankets or timed bathroom trips or strategic doors that closed just before I entered. Still, I didn't say anything. It felt like a private battle she was fighting with her own reflection, and the last thing she needed was me pointing it out. The first time I asked about it, we were in the bedroom, and she was changing out of one oversized sweatshirt into another. I made a light comment, something dumb about how stretchy clothes made it hard to see the baby bump, and she froze, turned her back to me, and said softly that her body was changing in ways I wouldn't understand. She told me she was embarrassed, that she'd started to get stretch marks already and couldn't even look at herself in the mirror anymore. Her voice cracked when she said it, and I felt like a monster for even bringing it up. I walked over, put my hands on her arms, told her it didn't matter to me, that none of that mattered, and she gave me a tight smile and said she just needed time. After that, I didn't mention it again. The belly, when it did begin to appear, didn't arrive the way I expected. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable beneath her sweatshirts, just a slight curve that seemed to come and go depending on the time of day or the angle of her posture. Some mornings it looked rounded, others not at all. I chalked it up to positioning again. I'd never been through this before, never watched a pregnancy unfold up close, and everything I knew came from half-read articles and baby apps that told me what fruit size the fetus was supposed to be each week. One moment it was a fig, then a lime, then a grapefruit. The bump didn't quite match that timeline, but I told myself not every woman followed the textbook. Still, I kept watching. Quietly, without letting her see me do it. She explained her silence about her body by doubling down on the shame. She'd bring it up without me asking, sometimes casually, sometimes with tears just beneath the surface. One night she came into the living room while I was watching TV, holding a cup of tea, and sat next to me with a blanket already draped across her midsection. She leaned into me, rested her head on my shoulder, and whispered that she hated the way she looked, that she didn't feel like herself anymore, that it was hard to be touched, even hugged, when she felt so disgusting all the time. I turned the TV off, held her close, told her again that she was beautiful, that I didn't care about stretch marks or weight or anything except her being healthy. She nodded but didn't say anything, just sipped her tea and stared out the window. She went to the doctor more often now, sometimes twice a week, and said her OB was just being cautious. She told me her hormone levels were a bit unstable, and they were monitoring things more closely to avoid complications. I asked if I could come, and she said the clinic had strict visitor policies unless it was a major milestone visit. I offered to wait in the car outside. She said that would make her anxious. So I kept working. That was the easiest way to feel like I was contributing, like I was showing up for both of them. I took every extra shift offered, worked weekends, even doubled up on a few back-to-backs to make sure we had savings for when the baby arrived. I was tired all the time, but the kind of tired that comes with purpose. She kept the house clean, stocked with healthy food, followed what looked like a routine. I'd come home and find her on the couch reading articles about birth plans or filling out prenatal meal journals, and it made me feel like she was really taking this seriously, like she was preparing herself to be the kind of mother she wanted to be. We didn't argue much anymore. There was a strange calmness in the house, like the baby had replaced all the old tension with something neutral. Not warm, not joyful, just quiet. A truce neither of us said aloud. I managed to go with her to a couple of appointments early on. The doctor, Dr. Kevin Wolf, was professional, charismatic, exactly what you'd expect from a private OB with a full calendar. He had a kind smile, a clipboard full of jargon, and an easy way of reassuring us that everything looked perfect. He showed me scans, gray smudges on screens that he pointed at with confident fingers and labeled with words I didn't fully understand. I nodded like I did. I smiled like I saw what he saw. The truth is, I didn't know what the hell I was looking at. To me, it was just static with a shadow in the middle. But she was glowing next to me, squeezing my hand, nodding in rhythm with every word he said, and I figured that was enough. If the doctor wasn't worried, why should I be? Still, something didn't sit right. The belly stayed hidden. She never let me feel it, never invited me to touch or connect. She never talked about movement, never described a flutter or a kick. I'd ask gently, "Have you felt anything yet?" And she'd pause, look down, and say not really, that the baby was probably sleeping or turned around. Sometimes she'd smile and say I should be patient, that I'd feel it soon, that it would be magical. But that moment never came. I started to wonder if maybe she was just extra private, that maybe some women didn't like being touched, that maybe she was just shy. And if I brought it up too much, it would only make things worse. There were times I stood outside the bathroom door while she was inside, listening to her shuffle around, wondering if she was just changing or doing something else entirely. I never caught her in the act of adjusting anything, but my gut started humming with static, low and constant. I didn't have proof, just a handful of inconsistencies, of timing that didn't quite add up, of explanations that felt just a little too rehearsed. I told myself to stop overthinking it. She was pregnant. There were pictures on the fridge. There was paperwork on the coffee table. There was a doctor who confirmed it. There were reasons. Always reasons. And none of them were enough to justify accusing the woman carrying my child of lying to me. So I kept showing up, kept waking early, kept working late, kept kissing her forehead before bed, kept watching that belly that never truly seemed to grow but always managed to be there. Some days it looked full. Other days, barely there at all. But I ignored the pattern, because I needed to believe this was real. I needed to believe we were building something that wasn't just a performance. I told myself that the baby was coming, that everything was fine, that I just didn't know what to expect. But something inside me whispered louder each day, a tension in my chest, a flicker of doubt that never fully went out. And then, one day, I came home early. I think deep down, I already knew something wasn't right, but I didn't want to admit it, not even to myself. We were still going through the motions, still pretending like the baby had somehow transformed our broken marriage into something resembling unity. But the truth was we were still strangers under one roof. Colder than before, just better at masking it. And as the weeks went by, the silence between us got heavier. There was no joy, no excitement, no intimacy, just these short rehearsed conversations about bottles and cribs and what color should the nursery be. I found myself wondering if this was how other couples felt before having a child, or if we were just faking it better than most. And that thought, that possibility, started to eat away at me. So one afternoon, after finishing work a little earlier than usual, I made a choice. Nothing dramatic, just a small effort to soften things. I picked up some tulips from the stand outside the grocery store, the kind she always bought when we first moved in together, and I grabbed her favorite chocolate from the checkout display. The air was warm for once. It felt like the kind of day you're supposed to share with someone. I pulled into the driveway with a weird mix of nervousness and hope in my chest, like maybe this tiny gesture might thaw the ice just a little. The house looked quiet, calm. I stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the porch. That's when I heard music. Low, melodic, the kind of smooth instrumental jazz she used to play when she was trying to relax. Something about it made me pause. I looked up toward the window. The blinds weren't fully closed, just turned at that angle that blocks light, but not shapes. And between the gaps, I saw movement. I should have looked away. I should have just walked through the front door and let it be a normal night. But I didn't. I stepped closer, leaned ever so slightly toward the window, and what I saw froze me in place. She was in the living room, her back to me, laughing. Laughing like I hadn't seen her laugh in months. Not the polite laugh she gave me out of obligation, but something lighter, younger, like she'd stepped out of our life and into one where she actually wanted to exist. And then I saw him. Kevin, her OB, standing comfortably in our living room. No lab coat, no clipboard, no medical anything. Just a t-shirt and jeans, his shoes off, sipping from one of our mugs like he'd been there 100 times before. And on the couch, right between them, casually tossed onto the throw pillows like it belonged there, was something I didn't understand at first. A strange, pale, round shape. But then the angle shifted, and I saw it clearly. A fake pregnancy belly. Silicone, detailed, designed to imitate the weight and curve of a real one, with skin texture and the faint line I'd read about, something meant to fool the eye if you weren't looking too close. She wasn't wearing it. She was just standing there, completely flat beneath her tank top, hair down, skin smooth, stomach untouched by any stretch mark she'd sworn had made her so self-conscious. There was no pregnancy, just a carefully maintained illusion. And the man I'd trusted to show me blurry dots on an ultrasound screen was standing in my house, smiling like he owned it. I stood there for what felt like hours, not breathing, not thinking, just watching as the entire illusion unraveled behind that window pane. She touched his arm once, laughed again. They talked like people who had rehearsed this 1,000 times. I didn't hear words, but I didn't need to. Everything I'd tried so hard to believe came crashing down in the stillness of that moment. I didn't go inside. I didn't confront them. I didn't throw open the door or scream or demand an explanation. I looked down at the tulips in my hand, the candy I'd bought with stupid hope in my heart, and I just let them go. The flowers hit the pavement first. The chocolate followed. I stepped back slowly, turned around, and walked down the street like I'd forgotten where I lived. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed space. Air. Something to drown out the sound of that music still playing in my head. I walked past 3 blocks before I even realized I was still holding my car keys. I stood under a tree and watched the wind push leaves around, blinking hard, my mind blank except for that image. Her stomach, flat and smooth, and that molded silicone belly sitting like a lie in plain view. For 20 minutes I stood there, trying to make sense of how deep the lie really went. The appointments, the ultrasounds, the late-night cramps, the whispering shame about her stretch marks. All of it carefully crafted, scripted. I thought about every overtime shift I took, every apology I made for being distant, every moment I told myself I needed to try harder to be a good father to a baby that didn't even exist. I didn't cry. Not yet. I didn't even feel angry. Just hollow. I walked back to the house slowly, feet heavy, heart numb. And when I reached the porch, I picked up the candy bar from the sidewalk, dusted it off, walked inside like nothing had happened, and placed it on the kitchen counter next to an empty vase she'd left out last week. The flowers stayed in the gutter. I washed my hands. I took off my shoes. I asked how her day had been, and she smiled at me like I was still part of the lie. I said I was going to bed early. She didn't follow. I stared at the ceiling for hours that night, watching shadows move, waiting for the rage to kick in. But it didn't. Just silence. And the strange comfort that comes when you finally stop guessing. I knew now. I knew everything. She wasn't carrying our child. She was carrying a story, and I'd been the only one who didn't know it was fiction. But the curtain was coming down, and next time, it wouldn't be a quiet exit. It would be a show. After everything I had seen with my own eyes, after watching the lie laid bare through the living room window, I could have confronted her then and there, could have ended the entire charade in a single breath, but something held me back. Not fear, not confusion, just cold clarity. A confrontation behind closed doors would have let her escape the truth quietly, would have given her time to spin another version, to cry, to scream, to play the victim. And after everything she'd done, that was the last thing she deserved. No, she wanted a performance, months of pretending, of scenes played out with props and supporting characters and carefully selected words. So I decided I'd give her one final act, one final scene, but it would be mine. I brought up the idea of a gender reveal party 2 days later, sitting across from her at breakfast. I told her I felt like I hadn't been present enough, that I wanted to do something together, to celebrate this milestone with our families, to finally feel like we were having a real moment. I watched her face closely as I said it, saw the way her smile faltered for just a second, then brightened like a spotlight snapping back on. Yes, she said softly, like she didn't expect me to offer anything. That would be perfect. She moved fast after that, like she'd been waiting for the chance to show off. She started planning within hours, calling her sister, texting friends, bookmarking cakes, picking out decorations. I told her I'd help with everything. I said I wanted it to be a true celebration. We spent an entire afternoon going over details. She chose a pastel theme, pale pinks and blues, with a little banner that said, he or she. Let's see. She ordered plates and cups with baby animals, and I helped her pick out favors for the guests. Tiny white candles with, "It's a" written in gold lettering. She giggled about how clever it all was, like this wasn't just a party, but proof that our family was finally on track. I suggested string lights in the backyard, said we could do it around sunset for a softer look. She clapped her hands like a child and said yes. I ordered the lights that night and paid extra for express delivery. I asked what kind of cake she wanted. She scrolled through a few designs and chose a white fondant cake with pink and blue layers hidden inside, so when we cut into it, the color would reveal the gender. She picked a bakery that specialized in event cakes and placed the order while I sat beside her, smiling like I hadn't already seen the truth. She even decided to rent a smoke bomb, the kind that releases a colored puff in the air. Pink for a girl, blue for a boy, she said, as wide like a performer waiting for applause. I nodded and said it was a great idea. She planned every moment down to the minute, when guests should arrive, when we'd pose for photos, when we'd make the announcement. I offered to set up the speaker system and suggested a playlist. She laughed and told me she was happy I was involved. You're going to be such a good dad, she said. I just smiled and thanked her. I told her I'd start working on the guest list. She said she wanted her parents, her sister, a few close friends. I added names from my side, my brother, a couple of cousins, even my boss. I told her I wanted the people who mattered to see this moment. Of course, she said, the more the merrier. And while she planned the celebration, I planned something else. I created a folder on my computer and titled it For the Reveal. Inside, I saved screenshots of every fake ultrasound she'd ever sent, 2 of them traced back to stock photo websites. I included the purchase receipt from the prosthetic belly, pulled from our shared credit card history. I added the delivery confirmation. I printed it all out, slipped it into a plain white envelope, and tucked it beneath a stack of envelopes we use for bills. I reviewed it every night before bed, not out of doubt, but out of precision. I wanted to be sure there were no gaps, no weak points she could twist into another version of her truth. I rehearsed what I would say. Not a speech, not some dramatic blow-up. Just the facts. A calm, steady unpacking of what really happened. I timed it in my head, imagined the moment, the cake cut, the cheers, the cameras, the silence as I tapped a glass or picked up the mic, and then the room folding in on itself as I spoke. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to let the truth land like a pin dropping in a quiet room. While she arranged decorations and fussed over whether the confetti should be hand-cut or store-bought, I finalized my list. I matched her energy, played the part. She never suspected anything. I think she believed she truly won, that her fantasy was too far along to be interrupted. She didn't notice that I stopped asking questions. She didn't see how still I had become. She thought I was relaxing into the role of father-to-be. But I was just letting her build the stage higher. Because the fall would be longer. I let her decorate our home with baby cutouts and balloons, let her tie bows on folding chairs, let her hang paper lanterns with little question marks drawn in pastel ink. I complimented her work. I told her how proud I was of her. I told her this would be a moment we'd never forget. And I meant it. Because when the day came, it would be exactly that. Unforgettable. The day of the party felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. Our backyard was strung with soft pastel decorations, paper lanterns, blue and pink streamers, a balloon arch my brother helped assemble, tables lined with white tablecloths and floral centerpieces her sister picked up that morning. It looked like the kind of event you'd see in a parenting blog, curated and cheerful, a perfect illusion. People began arriving early, her parents with matching grandma and grandpa pins on their shirts, her sister carrying cupcakes, her friends with wrapped gifts and scented candles, all smiles and excitement. My side of the family trickled in shortly after. My mother gave her a hug and called her glowing. My cousin brought a camera to take photos for the baby book. I greeted everyone, offered drinks, thanked them for coming. I wore the shirt she'd bought me, the one that said, Dad Life Loading, in faded navy print. She wore her pink sundress with the ribbon tied just above where her belly was supposed to be. The silicone was strapped underneath, I could tell. Her walk was slightly stiffer than usual, and she kept adjusting her waistband like it was digging into her. But no one noticed. Everyone was focused on the performance, and she delivered every line perfectly. Laughing, smiling, hands on her stomach every few minutes, telling everyone how nervous she was to find out what we were having. I nodded beside her, kissed her on the cheek once or twice, smiled at every camera flash, played my role, so while I almost started to forget it was a lie. But I didn't forget. Not for a second. As the sun began to dip, casting that soft gold light she had wanted for the photos, she called everyone to gather near the back table where the cake sat untouched in its glossy white box. She held the knife in her hand and looked at me with a kind of pride, like she believed this moment had sealed everything, like whatever doubts I once had were now buried under frosting and plastic cutlery. I stepped beside her, placed my hand over hers like we were one, and together we cut down the middle. The knife slid through with ease. When we pulled it out, the crowd leaned in. She lifted the first slice, and there it was, pink cake, neatly baked, no surprises. Someone shouted, "It's a girl," and the applause followed immediately. Her friends clapped. Her mother cried. Her sister squealed and hugged someone nearby. A wave of congratulations washed over us like we'd just completed some grand achievement, like we'd brought life into the world by slicing into a box of sugar and food coloring. She beamed. I watched her take it all in, eyes wide, hands trembling, probably from the adrenaline. And then, I stepped forward. I raised my hand and asked for a minute of everyone's attention. The noise died down slowly, then completely. People turned, smiling, glasses in hand, ready for a toast or some heartfelt words. She looked at me curiously, maybe even a little nervous. I cleared my throat. "First," I said, "I want to thank everyone for coming. This day has been important for both of us, and it means a lot that you're all here to celebrate with us." I paused, glanced at her. "But there's something I need to share. Something honest." Her smile flickered, just a little. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the envelope. Simple, white, unlabeled. "Before we go any further," I continued, "I think it's only fair that we all be on the same page. Because for the past few months, what you've seen, what I've been shown, hasn't exactly been what it seemed." Her body shifted, just slightly. Her fingers tightened around the knife handle. "You've been told we're expecting a baby," I said. "But that's not true. We're not. We never were." The silence hit like a slap. No one moved. "Everything you believed about this pregnancy wasn't real," I went on, voice steady. "Every ultrasound, every appointment, every symptom. All faked. Even the belly she wore was an artificial prop. The photos? Stock images. The doctor." I glanced at her. Closer than you'd think. People were frozen, mouths open, hands still halfway raised with drinks or phones. I opened the envelope and held up the printouts, receipts, screenshots, records. "I didn't want to believe it at first," I said, "but the evidence kept adding up. And when I came home early one night, I saw it all. Her and him. And the truth, sitting right there on the couch." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just let it sit in the air, heavy and undiluted. She dropped the knife. It hit the table with a dull clatter. Her face went pale. Her mother looked at her, confused. Her sister whispered something under her breath. My cousin lowered his camera slowly, stunned. No one moved toward her. No one said a word. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She blinked, swallowed. Her hands trembled now, not from adrenaline, but exposure. This was no longer her show. The spotlight had shifted. The decorations fluttered in the breeze behind her like props from a play already closing. And I stood there, calm, centered, watching as it all collapsed. Then I folded the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and placed it on the table beside the cake. "I think we've all seen enough," I said quietly, then turned and walked away. No one stopped me. I didn't look back. I stepped through the crowd like I was moving through fog, reached the gate, and pushed it open into the quiet street beyond. I didn't hear her cry. I didn't hear her explain. All I heard was the sound of my own footsteps walking away from a truth too heavy to ignore any longer. And somehow, after all of it, I felt nothing but peace. Was this the perfect revenge, or would you have done more?